Tashdalek, welcome to Global Alliance for Tibet and Persecuted Minorities. I'm Tsering Pasa. Today, our topic is His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, the 1989 Nobel Peace Laureate. The Tibetan Spiritual Leader, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, was born on 6 July 1935 in Taktser, Amdo, northeastern Tibet. This year, 2021, marks the 86th birthday of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. We are very delighted to have a very prominent British scholar to speak on the lives, his contribution and achievements. And I would like to welcome Alex Norman. And welcome, Alex Norman.
Tashdalek, to you
Lake. And if I briefly introduce Alex Norman, he is the founder and the director of the Dalai Lama's Center for Compassion in Oxford, England. He holds a BA in philosophy and theology and a master's in Oriental studies from the University of Oxford. After his stint in the British Army as an officer, Alex Norman worked as a journalist for The Spectator, a weekly British magazine on politics, culture, and current affairs. The Spectator is the oldest weekly magazine in the world. The current British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was once the editor of The Spectator. An acclaimed scholar on Tibet and the Dalai Lama, Alex Norman is a long-time associate of His Holiness, having worked closely with the Tibetan leader on his autobiography, Freedom and Exile in 1990. His other work on the Dalai Lama include Ethics for the New Millennium. That's that. Oops, there we go. And the Freedom and Exile. There we go. That's that. And holder of the Lotus Secret Lives of the Dalai Lama. That's 2008. And Beyond Religion, Ethics for a Whole World in 2011. And his latest book, The Dalai Lama, An Extraordinary Life, published in February 2020. In addition, Alex Norman has served as a speechwriter for His Holiness the Dalai Lama and on the Tibetan Leaders Special Review Committee. Alex Norman is also the president of the London-based charity Help Tibet, and he has been supporting the charity for over the past decade. Now, without taking any more time, I'm going to invite Alex Norman to speak on this important subject, especially the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama is much talked about, with strong interference from the Chinese Communist regime in Beijing. So I'll hand over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Tsering Pasang. It's a great honor to be invited to speak on this auspicious occasion of His Holiness's 86th birthday. And I'm always reminded when I'm asked to speak in public about His Holiness of the great good fortune and privilege that I've had for knowing His Holiness over so many years. I first met him in 1987 when I went to interview him for The Spectator, and I most recently saw him in 2019, just before the pandemic broke. And in the interval, as Tsering Pasang mentioned, I've worked on a number of books with His Holiness, 3 of His Holiness's own books, and then I've written 2 of my own books, which are, if you like, historical accounts of the Dalai Lama institution, and then an historical account of His Holiness's life. The most recent one being this one here, which came out last year. And one of the things, I don't want this to be a very formal address. I really just want to share some thoughts and reflections with you. And I regret that I'm having to do this in English and to have to admit that my spoken Tibetan is so poor that I can't give any kind of speech in Tibetan. But I hope you'll be able to follow me. So really what I want to do is to focus on partly my personal experience of working with His Holiness, and partly just to share some thoughts and reflections on some aspects of His Holiness's personality. I would say that one of the great things about knowing His Holiness has been to see how remarkably consistent he has been in all that time. I saw him most years, at least once, for private discussions between when I first met him in '87 and 2 years ago. And he's the same person that I most recently met as the person that I met back in 1987, are the same highly intelligent, engaging, bright, hopeful, enthusiastic, serious, committed, yet somehow always playful person that he was when I first met him. And I think this is one of the remarkable things about the Dalai Lama. You won't get him changing his mind or changing his opinion on the turn of a penny. What we get instead is consistency, extraordinary consistency, and commitment to his people, commitment to his role as Dalai Lama. And in political terms, also, we see his commitment to democracy. And I think this is one of the most attractive but also important aspects of His Holiness's public work, his commitment to democracy and the way in which he has sought over the years to implement democracy in the Tibetan political system that he inherited. And it's worth saying that what he inherited from the 13th Dalai Lama was a highly conservative and one could almost argue authoritarian approach to politics, which had emerged over the years since the founding of the Dalai Lama institution. The 13th Dalai Lama himself was famous for being quite autocratic and quite severe in some ways. And it is an astonishing thing to see the way that the present Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, has brought the institution up to date. Of course, one of the difficulties and one of the weaknesses, you could argue, of the Dalai Lama institution historically has been the lengthy gap between the demise of one Dalai Lama and the coming of age and the assumption of political authority by the next Dalai Lama. And really, it's this difficulty that is one of the things that the Dalai Lama, the present Dalai Lama, has sought to overcome by his introduction of democracy and by his decoupling of the institution of the Dalai Lama from the political authority of Tibet, so that since 2011, the Dalai Lama is no longer the de facto or the automatic head of state of the Tibetan political apparatus, and that rather he's invested that authority back in the people. He's returned power to the people. And this is a remarkable achievement if you think about it. Normally it's the other way around. You find political leaders tend to, the longer they're there, the longer the more deeply they entrench themselves in the political apparatus. And in fact, the only other example I can think of this in my lifetime has been the monarchy in Spain. It's not a very good comparison, but it's a gesture in the same direction. But what we have with the present Dalai Lama is a thoroughgoing commitment to democracy. And it's interesting again to see this reflected in the early experiences that he had. When he traveled to China in 1954-55, he saw the Communist Party and the Communist leadership up close and personal, if you like. And then again, when he visited India a year later, in 1956, he was able to contrast the commitment of these two respective regimes to democracy. And he pretty quickly understood, in fact, he instantly, could say, understood the difference between paying lip service to the idea of democracy and actually implementing it. And he found it implemented most thoroughly in India. So that when he came out into exile in India in 1959, he understood precisely what he wanted to do. And we see this in an early interview, actually, a remarkable interview, which you can find on YouTube, which was recorded by one of the Thai princes in 1960. And here we see the Dalai Lama affirming his commitment to reform, to change, yet also to preserving the best of what the Tibetan tradition had to offer. And for the Dalai Lama, of course, what the best that the Tibetan tradition has to offer is the religious tradition. And it's that he sought to preserve rather than the political institutions that he inherited. So we can talk of the Dalai Lama's farsightedness, his farsightedness in seeing that he had a unique opportunity at the time of coming into exile in 1959 to do away with a lot that had accumulated around the institution of the Dalai Lama, a lot of the formality, a lot of the, the fixed ideas about how things should be done. And he understood, he grasped immediately that democracy was the way in which he could bring about change, and he could realign the institution of the Dalai Lama with the wishes of the people, and that it was the people rather than the institution itself that was important, and that his job was not to serve the institution, or rather that in serving the institution, the best way that he could do it was by serving his people. And I think rather in the same way that Queen Elizabeth II has demonstrated over almost as long a period her commitment to the monarchy and also her commitment to her people and to the Commonwealth. We see the same dedication, but perhaps one could say even more so in the case of the Dalai Lama, because after all, the British monarchy has inherited a rather different political system than the system that the Dalai Lama inherited. And his great achievement has been to implement this reform of the Dalai Lama institution. So I would say that this is really the crowning achievement of his career, his political career, if you like, the way in which he, right from the earliest times, wanted to bring about and institute a democratic constitution for the future, for a future possible free Tibet. And this was in the teeth of some considerable opposition. There were many who felt very uncomfortable when he insisted that a two-thirds majority could actually remove the Dalai Lama from office. Many of the more conservative members of his office felt that this was a bridge too far, we might say. But no, the Dalai Lama insisted that that clause had to be there right from the beginning. And he's been faithful to that right up to the present time. And what's interesting to see now is that as he approaches what he would call great old age, after all, he'll soon be 90 years old, and he's now beginning to think of the future, not just for himself, not just for the people of Tibet, but also of the institution itself. And he's made quite clear that there will be the 15th Dalai Lama, but only on one condition. And that one condition is that the people themselves want a 15th Dalai Lama. If the people want a 15th Dalai Lama, there will be one. If the people decide that they have no use for a 15th Dalai Lama, he's made it quite clear that there will not be one. So again, we see the democratization of the institution carried through to its logical conclusion. And again, we see this in marked contrast to the attitude of the People's Republic of China, who claim that the appointment of the 15th Dalai Lama is a matter for themselves and for themselves alone. This seems to an outsider such as myself and to many others who watch Tibetan politics from a distance to be a completely ludicrous claim. How could it be that the avowedly atheistic Chinese Communist Party could claim that the institution of the Dalai Lama is a matter of their, it lies within their jurisdiction? How could it be that they even acknowledge the system of reincarnation that obtains in Tibet when they themselves deny that there is anything other than this one life, this one world? So that seems a remarkable contradiction. And yet we have to remember that this attempt on the part of the Chinese leadership, the Chinese authorities, to usurp and suborn the Tibetan political process is a very old one. It has a long history and dates back to the Qing dynasty, several hundred years. In fact, you could say that the last 300 years has been characterized by a continuous struggle between the Chinese and the Tibetans, whereby the Chinese have sought to assert their authority. Now, of course, today, since 1959, since the so-called peaceful liberation of Tibet, it's very obvious that the Chinese do indeed control all of the political institutions within Tibet itself. But the one thing that they haven't succeeded in controlling is the one thing that has shown itself to be even more powerful than the leadership of the Communist Party, and that is the human spirit. The human spirit has shown itself throughout history, throughout every culture, throughout every religious dispensation, to be stronger and more resilient than mere secular authority. And so long as the Tibetan people retain their spirit, retain their belief, retain their culture, retain their commitment to their religion, to their culture, and to the Dalai Lama, I think we will see the Chinese fail again and again to assert full authority. It will always elude them because the spirit, the human spirit, and the human spirit which expresses itself most naturally in democratic forms is one thing that will always elude them. So I think this is another remarkable testament to the Dalai Lama's farsightedness. He sees this, he understands this, and he trusts the Tibetan people, he trusts their judgment, and he trusts their commitment. So at the end of this short address, I would like to say that if anybody wishes to give His Holiness a birthday present, they could do no better than indeed the American administration did in 2020, just a year ago, when they affirmed their commitment to the principles of democracy and said that the future reincarnation of the Dalai Lama is a matter for the Tibetan people. If people wish to give the Dalai Lama a present, I think it would be in their commitment and affirmation of their commitment to the principles of democracy and the wisdom of the people. Thank you very much indeed for asking me to join you.